It's a Friday evening. I don't expect a lot of people are going to be on the stream tonight, but just want to get things caught up with what's going on in Ukraine. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I got a couple of interesting odds and ends to start off with. In particular, we might discover that Putin is declaring that he is ready to negotiate again, but there's a catch. You see, the negotiation has to start with Russia keeps everything it has right this very moment and says that if they don't want that, well, then they're just going to have to keep on fighting no matter what. Usually, when Vladimir Putin says that he's willing and ready to negotiate a ceasefire, it means that he's found that he needs some time to try and put his forces back together again, kind of do the Humpty Dumpty thing. If they, as he said, if Ukraine wants to return to negotiations, let it return based on the realities on Earth and the results of the Istanbul negotiations, meaning how it stands right now. Peskov stated, however, that they're not ready for negotiations at all. That's just crazy talk. So, as always, the Russian government manages to give every answer but a straight one. Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, states that Putin wants to derail Ukraine's peace summit by claiming readiness for a ceasefire. And I actually can see this being the case and more likely than any of the others, because every time Putin said, oh, I'm interested in a ceasefire, the Western powers have been, okay, maybe you shouldn't send more stuff. And so it's become a regular pattern. One that I suspect is not working as well as it used to. As Anton Herashchenko states, even Lukashenko is laughing. You can kind of see him right there as Putin talks about being ready for the negotiation process, and Lukashenko's sitting there laughing his head off at the same time. Of course, from Igor Sushko, Osechkin's sources, that's his source here, in Russian intelligence services have called out Reuters' Moscow bureau chief Guy Falconbridge's claim that Putin wants Ukraine's ceasefire on the current front lines as planted Kremlin disinformation to weaken support for Ukraine. So there you go. That's all possible aspects of that one. Take your pick on which one you believe. I happen to fall into the crowd that believes this is just a craven attempt to get Ukraine to back off, while Russia is in the middle of a major purge of their senior officers. From the Institute for the Study of War, the Kremlin is pursuing a concerted effort to remove senior Russian defense officials and has likely expanded this effort to senior officers commanding Russian combat operations in Ukraine. The Russian Investigative Committee announced on May 23rd the arrest of Russian Deputy Chief of the General Staff and head of its main communications directorate, Lieutenant General Vadim Shamarin, and head of the Russian Ministry of Defense's Department for State Procurement, Vladimir Verteletsky. Shamarin was accused of accepting a bribe, honestly, bribe, corruption, graft, etc. Official Kremlin statements and mail blogger speculation about the arrests and command changes signal that more senior officers could face removal. And there's been a variety of reports on this, talking about them allegedly receiving bribes and corruption. And the thing is that this is the normal operation for Russian senior officers. They take bribes. They do corruption. They do all these things, usually with Vladimir Putin's permission. But everyone that does is basically generating evidence for when Vladimir Putin no longer has a need for you. They called it a bribe on an especially large scale received by the communications directorate officer there. Then there's somebody else that's popping up in the conversation. Let me just go ahead and, in fact, I'll come back to him in just a moment here. Another one that was removed from his post is Sukrab Akhmedov, who is, as I understand it, an active commander in the field until just now. So the another Russian Ministry of Defense, Vladimir Verteletsky, is detained for corruption. Russia's prosecution of officers is unfortunately good for their military. However, so many corruption prosecutions undermines Russian soldiers' faith in their leaders, according to journalist Jason J. Smart. Now let's talk Ivan Popov for a moment or two. Popov was brought into court for a pretrial arraignment right then. Initially, there was discussion about whether he would be sent home, basically home-based imprisonment at that point in time. He was not. He's accused of embezzling lots and lots of money. You've got to watch this video here. Let me pop this back and pause it for a second. And let's make this bigger. Bloop, bloop. Yeah, that'll work. This is Popov being brought into court. And you can see he's got guards, but they're quite spaced away from him. They're not direct control of him as a prisoner. I also noted that they're well armed as well, though some of them had their weapons at low ready, others just had them slung over their shoulder. So it's clear that Russia is concerned about Popov. In fact, when he got into court, he was smiling contemptuously and laughing at various parts of this situation here. And the thing is that there's been whispers coming from various aspects of the military that Popov's unit might actually do something about this. They might rise up and try and bring him back out of prison. Now, there's been no other evidence of this, just whispers. But whispers are enough for Vladimir Putin, and he does not like having competition. Russian soldiers loyal to Major General Popov, former commander of the 58th Army, are vocally defiant in their communications and are threatening a military rebellion to free him in Moscow. The Kremlin then backtracked on placing him under house arrest and opted to keep him in prison. And overall, we've ended up with 4 high-profile arrests in just the last few days. As Tyndar states, forget about all the charges. All Russian generals and officials are guilty of that, even in large quantities. This is not the reason that those men have been detained. This is a purge. Remember Stalin? Just saying. And the reasons can all be attributed that those men have been a severe problem for the Putin regime. Something is cooking again in Moscow. It is obvious that there is a huge power play going on. Shoigu's transfer to the Security Council is just another sign that there is a modification of the power structures in Russia ongoing. And I think there is a significant chance that right now Russia is trying to stop another coup, a la what the Wagner Group did last year. So it's pretty dicey over there in Russia. Now, this information overall comes from Robbie Russell, good friend of the channel and good friend of mine. And I have expanded on the information he originally provided. There is a bunch of attacks by Ukrainian forces, meaning drones and similar, on Krasnodar Krai region in Russia, including this long-range missile warning system radar that was heavily damaged by this drone strike. Look at the overall damage to this building is significant. In addition, Su-27, Su-30, and Su-34 fighter jets have been damaged at Kushevskaya Air Base in Krasnodar Krai after a Ukrainian kamikaze drone attack. You can see all of the various airplanes being impacted by this. You can see some of the burn marks on the pavement and things like that. So clearly there was a successful attack by Ukrainian forces on this airfield in Krasnodar Krai. I've got this from multiple sources here with confirming footage, as I just mentioned. The Kiev Independent states that the Ukrainian drone attack damaged 2 Russian aircraft. I've seen several that have mentioned at least 3 and possibly more that were damaged as well. They only talk about the Su-27 and Su-34. And clearly this was another successful attack. Even a video of the difference between the bits of damage here. This is clearly a confirmed situation here, not just partial leftovers. Drones also attacked the 818th Separate Radio Engineering Center in Krasnodar territory, where the drones attacked a building and a fire broke out afterwards. This was a kind of a surprise because the amount of attacks on Krasnodar Krai is extensive. It's not just a couple of things here. Um, in the meantime, this was not the only place that was getting hit. A long-range radar was also hit in Voronezh, the Voronezh DM. Uh, so no, take it back. This is actually in Krasnodar region as well. And this is part of the Russian strategic defense system against nuclear attack. It's also how they're going to be keeping track of a lot of the other things that are coming around in Ukraine, watching for missiles and drones and airplanes. So clearly, this is something they want to talk about. More of these videos showing up. These have an immense detection range, 6,000 kilometers, 7,000 kilometers in altitude, while tracking up to 500 targets. We're not talking, this is not just your weather radar for the day, you know? And again, the Krasnodar Krai military base again. So a lot of just confirming information on this attack. And it was obviously a very effective one on Ukraine's part. Now, I'd mentioned in the previous video that there was that kerfuffle, and I'm going to use the word kerfuffle because Russia had put out a document saying, okay, we're going to change our water borders with Estonia and Finland right here at the Narva River and in the Baltic Sea here. So that got pulled offline, and they said, no, we have no intentions of doing anything like that. However, Estonia's police and border guard said that on May 23rd, the Russian border guards removed the boundary markers from the Narva River that separates Russian and Estonian territory. These buoys were installed largely by mutual agreement prior to the full-scale invasion into Ukraine. But since 2023, Russia has not agreed with Estonia's position regarding the placement of buoys. This year, Russia said it disagreed with the location of about half of the planned 250 floating markers. Estonia has installed light buoys in Estonian waters based on the State Border Act and the locations of the buoys that was agreed between border agencies in 2022. The first 50 buoys were installed on the Narva River on May 13th. On Thursday at about 3 a.m., Estonian border guards established that Russian border guards began to remove these floating signs. 24 were removed overnight, so the Russians effectively stole them. This is, again, they're trying to push those boundaries with now a NATO country. Troubling, very troubling. Now let's talk about the news out of Ukraine itself right now, and I'm going to start off with something a little bit fun. Mute the music. Woo, that's loud. This is a Russian T-90. The overall report shows 2 T-90 tanks being destroyed, but one of them was found in halfway decent condition, and the Ukrainian troops went ahead and captured and recovered it. So it's even operational enough to be driven onto the flatbed trailer and recovered back behind lines. And how did Russia miss this one, I guess you might say? The Ukrainians didn't have to take it out because, the Russians had already abandoned it. So good on good on Ukraine for capturing yet another piece of Russian hardware. And of course, this will soon be back on the front, this time with a Ukrainian flag on the side. Now, this got reported today, but it's actually from last year. Ukraine refused to accept some Leopard 1 tanks from Germany and Denmark due to defects. These Leopard 1A5s are older tanks, they're outdated, but they're basically a really decent gun, a 105 millimeter gun that's on a mobile chassis that's really decently mobile. So if you're not taking incoming fire to a great extent, they're great tanks for just getting that firepower into the battlefield. They've got more armor than, say, than many other things that the Ukrainians are using. But there was a bunch of problems with it, so the Ukrainians sent them back for repair. And as I understand it, since then, most of these have returned to the field in working order. From Kharkiv, and from President Zelensky in particular, Zelensky has visited Kharkiv, where a printing house, as in a bookmaking place, a publisher, was destroyed in a Russian attack. Now, what is the military value of a printing press and publishing center? There isn't one. The only reason for a targeted attack on this facility is to destroy Ukraine's knowledge and culture to the greatest extent possible. So that was interesting. There were multiple deaths out of this facility as well. So it's not something that's this is not a there's a lot more to this story, is what I'm trying to say. Here's some of the firefighters having extinguished that fire. You can see some of the operations going on here, some of the pictures of them working their way through the facility as the facility was put out. I might even have another bit on this. Let me just flip through real fast. Yes, there it is. Here's another picture of the, well, burned books. Sounds like another country that tended to burn books. This is doing it with missiles instead of doing it with a bonfire. Just saying. Ukraine states that they have got a $5 billion shortfall for military expenditures and are asking for additional assistance. Russia has increasingly been able to disrupt Starlink terminals in Ukraine, and it appears they are getting better with their electronic warfare in order to do so. Of course, we've been seeing indications that Russia's been using Starlink as well, and so they may have taken one of those terminals and determined what its weak points are and tuned their electronic warfare interference to it. In slightly more positive news, a pedestrian bridge called the Azov Wave has been opened in Kyiv. That was according to the capital's mayor. Now, this bridge was built with steel out of the Azovstal plant in Mariupol. The order was placed well before the start of the full-scale invasion. The parts were delivered 2 weeks before, as I understand, 2, maybe 3 weeks beforehand, and they have finally finished the bridge itself. It's perhaps a touch too artsy for my taste, but it's kind of now going to be a bit of a symbol for Ukraine of resisting against Russian aggression. Ukraine has put their first prisoners onto the front lines, or I should say they've freed them with the intentions of adding them to their military. 3,000, a little over 3,000 convicts who have expressed their willingness have started being trained and sent to the front. I imagine they've got a lot of training yet to do. On the downside, however, from Supernova Plus, 28 commanders have got of the Ukrainian armed forces have had a criminal case brought against them for not defending the Kharkiv border properly. From the court register, it states, in addition, it was established that the command of the 125th Brigade and its subordinate units, as a result of a negligent attitude towards military service, did not properly organize the defensive positions on the border of the Kharkiv region and Russia, which led to the loss of these positions, military equipment, and personnel divisions. So it looks like they're finding some people who were not doing their duty to their country. Let's go ahead and move over to the news out of Russia. Now, by the way, if you are joining me just now, go ahead and chime in. Let me know you're here. I do appreciate you being here, if so, and want you to know that I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say. Now, I forgot to put this with the sea border stuff over there. This is just talking about that whole situation there just a little bit more. They provide a map, though, this locations that Russia proposed for reassessing that includes a variety of islands here in the Gulf of Finland that currently Finland has control over, a couple that I think are in Estonian control, and clearly the purpose is to try and cause some chaos here and see what they can get away with. The Russians would love to just take over some of those islands without having to fire a shot, wouldn't they? Another Su-25 was shot down by Ukrainian forces over the Donetsk region. This is, I believe it's the fifth one. Yeah, 5 in recent weeks. So maybe Ukraine's managed to move some of their air defenses in just the right spots to catch those Su-25s at their most vulnerable point. There was an attack on Mospin Airport. Dang it, can't speak on that. The S-400 system was completely wiped out. As Null Report states, an 80s missile is taking out top of the bill air defense systems. And I've got a video of this somewhere, I think. And if I come back to it, if I find it, I will let you know. Oh, here it is. That made it. That's even easier. Chew. This is that Air S-400 system trying desperately to fire at the ATACMS missiles that are coming to destroy it. Now, it was a cluster warhead that was actually used. So you'll see in just a few moments here behind the troll face here, a whole bunch of small impacts all around this S-400 system. And I mean a whole bunch. See all these impacts right around here. And then all of a sudden, the remaining S-400 missiles start exploding. And it's fireworks all over the place. This is a retired from service American ATACMS missile. That's what they're firing at these things. These are things that we have said we're not going to use. They've not been updated. They've not been kept current. They've just been let languish. They've been intending to maybe rebuild them eventually. But look at what they're able to do. They're going right by Russia's top tier, top shelf S-400 air defense system. More air defenses being destroyed, this time in Osa AKM near Pisky, the occupied Donetsk region. This video is not very good, so I'm just going to go ahead and pause it. Then there's this interesting one. The Atesh partisan movement in occupied Crimea reports that Russian troops are evacuating personnel from Zankoy and are actively rebuilding and possibly modernizing airfields deeper in the peninsula, specifically at Kirovsk and Baherovo. These actions suggest that Russia aims to disperse their troops and equipment in anticipation of future successful Ukrainian attacks. That's right. They're having to basically almost abandon their closest airfield in Crimea because it's been subject to repeated attacks by Ukrainian forces. And each time they've lost more and more equipment, and they've lost more and more air defenses there too. So they're going to try and move farther back and try and set up shop elsewhere and spread things out a little bit more. But if the Ukrainians are able to hit them at Zankoy, they're able to hit them at these fields too. Hi, Luciano. Glad to see you here. Yes, about 800 million for S-400 battery system. And of course, that thing went up in fireworks. So no telling exactly how much damage that did to everything there. It's just, this is what even our old stuff can do. Now, this one, there was some controversy over this one over the last day and a half or so, 2 days, about a report on one of the mapping sites showing an Africa Corps unit over in the Kharkiv region. However, from the Ministry of Defense of the UK, over the past week, Russia has deployed units from Russia's Ministry of Defense's Africa Corps alongside regular Russian forces and Storm Z units during their offensive in Volchansk, northern Kharkiv. They describe their Africa Corps, real quick summary. This is what the Russians have put together to replace Wagner and their operations in Africa. Wagner had a bunch of shall we say, assets they were protecting there. They were also pilfering from those assets too. They had quite a few contracts along those lines. Down in Africa, they were in places like Syria, Libya, Burkina Faso, and Niger. The Russian Ministry of Defense almost certainly redeployed detachments from the Africa Corps to the Ukrainian border during April 2024 in preparation for this offensive. It is highly likely that Russia is reinforcing its war on Ukraine with resources previously assigned to Africa. And that could indicate some real desperation on Russia's part. They were really trying to put something together on this. Now, Russia finally admitted that, yes, the Islamic State was behind the Crocus Hall terrorist attack, but they still were like, no, Ukraine was still behind it somehow. Still, they're going to blame Ukraine for it, no matter if they're involved or not. Over at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the main external power supply was restored to the plant, putting them back into a safer condition. It's now got both of those power lines attached, and they're in much better shape now. Vladimir Putin decided that it was not enough to watch the West steal all of Russia's money, that he was going to do the same to the West, which they've been doing all along anyway by confiscating the assets of Western companies in Russia. Well, they've just signed off on a decree to do even more of that and steal even more Western assets that are inside Russia. So there you go. Robbie, glad to see you. You missed the whole section where I talked about Krasnodar and mentioned the information you were in. So, but glad to see you right now. I'm doing good, and always happy to see you on the stream. Which, by the way, now is probably a good moment to just kind of pause for a second. The I've started a new job this week, so things have been pretty darn busy for me this week. I'm trying to figure out exactly what the schedule is going to be for making sure Ukraine updates still happen, because I will be taking the time for it. Right now, I'm in a training period, which means I've got a little bit more time and a little bit less scheduled. But overall, I think I've got a pattern that's going to work for me. I will make an official announcement on that soon. In the meantime, I'm just happy to have some money coming back in again in a job here in my area. So thank you very much for thinking of me, guys, and I do appreciate you doing so. Let's go ahead and move on back to what we were talking about here. And Robbie, I'd love to hear how you are doing as well. I appreciated your message earlier today. Thank you. From the Kiev Post, partisan sabotage attack in Smolensk shuts down a Russian air defenses. Remember, I mentioned earlier the Atesh movement, talking about the Russians moving their their airplanes and staff farther back into Crimea, away from Zankoy. Well, they pulled off an attack in Smolensk, which resulted in the shutdown of Russian air defense systems. So they're really getting active over there, and they're taking bigger, bolder risks doing so. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to feel something happening over in Crimea. Nothing I can put my finger on, just an escalation, a new level of aggressiveness on Ukraine's part in taking out the resources in Crimea. And if Russia's not careful, they may find their little misadventure in Kharkiv, and the potential for attacking into Sumy may lose them Crimea entirely. We're watching this one. A Scalp missile reportedly wounded a top Russian general. Normally, I don't mention specific generals getting scalped, but he was wounded in a long-range missile attack on a staff meeting in Luhansk. Now, there's been several attacks on Luhansk lately, and it looks like the Ukrainians are trying to cause some chaos in the command structure over there. So all good stuff from Ukraine's perspective there. Crimean Wind, however, got a little bit sarcastic here. I'm just going to put it that way. The occupiers are awaiting an amphibious landing in the center of Yevpatoria. There are sandbags in the center on the embankment. Firing points have been set up on the wild beach along the Simferopol-Yevpatoria road. Locals say that Russian soldiers constantly walk along the road, and there are scarecrows in military uniforms, like they're expecting an assault in Yevpatoria. Let's see where that's at on the map. Yevpatoria, Ukraine, or Yevpatoria, Crimea, I guess we'll use for this one. Look at where Yevpatoria is in the overall scheme of things. Well south of this area where the Ukrainians have been working previously with their little landing raids and things like that. Can Russia really be expecting a landing here between Sevastopol and halfway up the coast? I don't know. But right here, I believe, is a bay where they used to keep some of their smaller patrol ships. So they might be getting a little paranoid, just a touch. All right, let's get back to this here. Boop, 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 boop. From Crimean Wind again, partial mobilization in Russia may be announced as early as the end of 2024, according to sources close to the leadership of the Russian armed forces. In order to maintain superiority, they will have to look for a new way to fill the army. There are not enough volunteers, even despite the what I consider pretty massive for Russia handouts. By the end of this year or early 2025, a new partial mobilization will become inevitable. Without it, major offensives are impossible. The authorities are still ready to sacrifice successes at the front in order to protect society from war. Shoigu boasted that in 2023 it was possible to attract almost 540,000 people to contract service, and at the beginning of this, another 50,000. Officials, including the new Minister of Defense Belousov, reject rumors about a second wave of mobilization. Interesting. By the way, this map here shows some of the map of the explosions that have been going around. Actually, earlier today, this would be overnight, last night local, which would be 8, 10, 12 hours ago. Just kind of back of my napkin, back of my head, I think 8 hours ago, if I remember correctly. So overnight, this is the map of explosions in Crimea. You see it spread all across the peninsula here, and means that they are really having some trouble over there, right there. Now, Russia continues to arrest and persecute the intelligentsia. We'll say it that way. They've sentenced another hypersonic expert to 14 years for treason, saying that they were trying to sell the secrets of these weapons around the world. And I'm pretty sure that was another thing Stalin did, was suppressed those of learned nature. And I think the Germans in World War II did much the same. It seems to be a pattern. Just saying. Hi, Lucille. Glad to see you as well. Always glad to have you on board. We got Robbie and Luciano over here, so we got a little bit of a crew going. So glad to see all of you. This is a better video of the strike on Mospin airfield in occupied Donetsk, showing the consequences of the attack. And you can see that's quite the explosion. That's the one I showed earlier where the whole thing went up in fireworks when an ATACMS cluster munition struck in the area. Those little bomblets really wrecked this system. Oops. There we go. From War Gonzo. Now, War Gonzo is a Russian source and a pro-Russian one at that. Interesting and alarming statistics. The rural population in our country, meaning Russia, is steadily declining, and something needs to be done about it. Possessing such vast territories, Russia with such trends risks ceasing to be one of the main agricultural countries. I hope experts in the government will decide what to do to prevent this, to stop the outflow of population to the swollen capitals. And then he talks about how Russia has grown these additional agricultural territories, and they've got all these idle, fertile lands, and there are no people to work these lands. And the whole situation is, don't have the manpower. They're literally experiencing a manpower shortage in an enormous nation that won't be able to do what they could do. See, and I've said this before, I'm going to say it just kind of briefly right now. If Russia was a positive influence on the world, they could be currently feeding the world out of all the land there with modern agricultural capabilities, modern agricultural technology. Russia alone could feed the world. But by putting all this effort into war instead, they are squandering their tremendous natural resources. And I do mean tremendous. That area has oil and gas galore. They've got other mineral deposits. They've got other resources that if they would take the time to develop their own nation, they would be sitting on a fortune, literally. But they have instead decided that expansion through warfare is how they're going to make their dough. And that's everything out of Russia itself. Let's pop over to the international front for just a moment and talk about, first off, the GLSDB bombs. Now, I saw something about them being used in Kharkiv with great effect recently. So the GLSDB is clearly in a non-jammed environment, very capable and very good. The problem is that the Russian electronic warfare systems are capable of jamming the weapons. And he says, while Boeing has said the weapon could defeat some jamming, it will still take months for Boeing to fix the jamming that they're experiencing with them right now. So the GLSDB is going back for a little bit of a redesign and some rework. Odds are they've just not shielded things properly or something along those lines. And we'll have to find out what that is eventually, but it's still going to require a rework. Germany's immediate action on air defense initiative is not really panning out. Germany's sending another Patriot battery. The U.S. may send another one, and Italy is preparing an aid package with a SAMP-T system. But everybody else is only doing smaller pledges, chipping in on materials and rockets, but not on full-on systems. So this is going to be a rough one. They're going to have to sort out and figure out how they're going to make this happen. Germany did add some more aid to Ukraine to their list. 10 more Leopard 1A5s, 20 MG3 machine guns, 8,500 155 millimeter shells, vector drones, hydrogen drones, a Beaver bridge laying tank, a Dox vehicle, a Berga Panzer II with spare parts, 4 mine clearing tanks, 2 mine plows, 400 LED lamps, which is kind of an odd one for me. Why would they need so many LED lamps? I mean, what kind of lamps are we talking about here? It just seems so odd to have that one specific thing separated like that. 16 Zetros trucks, 540 assault rifles, 80 precision rifles with 60,000 rounds of ammunition, 111 CR308 rifles, and 1.8 million ammo for small arms. So that's at least a nice little decent aid package that Germany's put together for them. There's been some other aid packages as well. The Germans did send another IRIS-T system over, and it's finally arrived. So that's another air defense system there. And the U.S. has confirmed a new $275 million military aid package as well, with ammunition for HIMARS, 155 and 105 millimeter artillery shells, 60 millimeter. Apparently, my tongue can't do metric today. 60 millimeter mortar rounds, tube-launched TOW missiles. I'm not going to say all that. Javelin and AT-4 anti-armor systems, precision aerial munitions, small arms and grenades, demolition munitions, anti-armor mines, tactical vehicles to recover equipment, helmets, body armor, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear protective equipment, and spare parts maintenance, etc. So that's another aid package that's being sent over from the U.S. They do them in these little chunks here and get them moving out the door as quick as they can. So that's at least a way to keep the aid flowing. Now, I don't talk about Orban all that much because the guy's, been a Russian stooge at various points in this war. And I want to know who snuck something into Orban's Wheaties over here, because this guy is talking way too much sense for a few seconds here. And I want you to kind of listen to this for a second. According to Viktor Orban, the Russian military is waging a serious and difficult war against Ukraine, and its capabilities, Russia's capabilities, are far exceeded by NATO, according to the Hungarian Prime Minister. If the Russians were strong enough to wrestle down the Ukrainians in one go, they would have done so already. I do not consider it logical that Russia, which cannot even defeat Ukraine, would all of a sudden come and swallow the Western world. The chances of this are extremely slim. So I want to know who put what into Orban's Wheaties. Why is he saying this now? And I have not come to a good conclusion on why yet. I do know that Orban has been saying that they're going to redefine their relationship with NATO to potentially opt out from military alliances deepening support for Ukraine. And, honestly, I would probably invite Hungary to leave NATO. Just put it right there on the table. You are absolutely welcome to depart NATO and see how they feel about it then. Just saying. Estonia is to provide 650,000 euros in humanitarian aid to Ukraine. That's going to be primarily for educational systems in the frontline areas and to assist children. Very much a noble cause. Norway also announced a new $190 million package of military assistance, though this one did not come with a whole lot of details. It does say it'll go towards air defense, naval capabilities, radar, anti-drone systems, and boats. Very interesting mix there. The Baltic countries are now pushing NATO to go for a 2.5% of GDP defense spending during the NATO summit. Overall, this makes a lot of sense, especially right now. The target's always been 2%. The U.S. has always well overspent that. A very small number of NATO allies have managed to get to that point. I believe it's Poland is currently pegging to try to go for 4% because they're looking right down the barrel of a Russian tank and they're going, I don't like what I'm seeing. And other countries are really stepping it up. So they are calling on other members of NATO to step up their game and get their defense spending in order and start building that defense industry. Really start ramping up to face the terror. Not really directly Ukraine war related, but the Prime Minister of the UK has announced a general election. Now, I am not quite clear on how this works over in the UK. This is I think they call it a snap election, where the ruling party, ruling is kind of the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying, the majority party and their coalition government, if they are no longer getting the majority of support, a snap general election can be called, and sometimes they do it so to kind of shore up their existing leadership, and other times it can totally backfire on them. So overall, Sunak has announced that they're going to have general elections in 6 weeks on July 4th. Welcome to Independence Day, UK. You could maybe sign up to be a 51st state if you would like. That's a joke. I don't really mean it because the UK is awesome. But the reports are that the possible leaders that would be running for it are both all in for helping out Ukraine. So from Ukraine's perspective, no change, but this is going to effectively dissolve parliament and create this election to happen in just a few weeks here. So their system, however it works over there, which I'm just kind of spitballing on what I remember from vague bits and pieces, means that they'll be having an election pretty shortly here. Hesse, the state of Hesse, which is part of Germany, can become the first federal state in Germany to introduce Ukrainian as a second foreign language in schools. That would indicate that there is a significant Ukrainian population in Germany, and Germany's providing the resources to keep them educated and well. The first group of combat pilots from Ukraine has completed training in Arizona, and they're ready to be sent back to Ukraine. We saw that the maintainers actually finished their training just a couple days ago and are on their way back to Ukraine. So all they need now is the airframes. Interesting. Poland is tightening security around the main transit hub for foreign military aid to Ukraine due to concerns about sabotage operations by Russia. That's right. There's been a lot of sabotage going on over there, and a lot of it's pointing right back at Russia, like they've got partisans and stooges taking care of it for them. So Poland's tightening security. On top of that, they're deploying U.S.-made balloons to help monitor its border with Russia, which will give them an ability to detect missiles, aircraft, and drones out to more than 300 kilometers and monitor their borders with Russia and Belarus. I have to admit, this looks like it's right out of World War II, the barrage balloons. So, interesting. That's everything on the international side. Let's go ahead and jump onto the front lines. Believe it or not, there's not that much on the front lines. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not things going on. There's always fighting, and, somebody's going to be shooting somebody pretty much everywhere across the front. As the Ukraine control map states, fighting continues in Robotyne, Staromorsk, Urozhain, Novomyhailivka, Charatina, Chasiv Yar, and Kharkiv direction. No substantial changes marked today, but Staromorsk is looking increasingly tenuous as Russian motorcycle troops seemingly enter unopposed. Now, the deep state map does kind of give a few odds and ends, just fighting near Otoratina. That's probably from a couple of days ago. So no changes to the front lines to speak of. The Ukrainian General Staff says that they have halted Russia's advance in the Kharkiv sector. We know that Volchansk in particular, they probably halted them right at that river that passes through the middle of town. On other areas, they're basically just holding them back from further progress. And the word is they've actually been working on some counterattacks. No word on where or what type or any success so far, just that those counterattacks are starting to take place, which should indicate that Ukraine has started to get their resources and soldiers in play in just the right ways to be able to do that. Now, this is a report from Chasiv Yar saying that the Russian troops are trying to advance in the area but have not entered the town. So we're getting just kind of little pieces saying there's fighting going on and there's a lot of it. The fact that we've got a day where there's no significant changes to the front lines is, I would think, pretty massive. Now, the situation in Vovchansk in particular, yep, this is Vovchansk here. The Ukrainians are saying that Russia is now bogged down in the battle for that town. Now, they're shelling it day and night. They're working on flattening it to nothing. But the fact is that this is where they're getting held back. They have found their morass. They found their, you know, I don't know, Vietnam or something like that, or where they're really in a bad situation and they don't have any ability to really move forward anymore. So it's a tough one for Russia now because Ukraine has managed to get their stuff in play and start the counterattacks. That's everything on the front lines. Let's go ahead and move on to the extras. There's a couple of interesting things here. Not some of it's not related. It's just a quick little grab bag. Some of them are really interesting though, so I do encourage you to stick around. China has begun its joint military exercise surrounding Taiwan with naval forces. This is the tightest cordon around the island that we've seen in a very long time, all reportedly part of a naval military exercise. Taiwan is watching this with a great deal of trepidation and has intercepted multiple enemy aircraft in their airspace even as this takes place. This whole situation could blow up very quickly if somebody does the wrong thing. Now, I wanted to share this one with you as well. The video's kind of grainy and hard to see, but I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Short, 17 seconds. This is an S-60 anti-aircraft gun. It's fully manned. It's got men in the positions here. This drone comes in and blows it up. Now, what's so significant about this? Normally, not much, but the S-60 was entered into service in 1960. Its design was being finalized during the middle of World War II. So this is a World War II era design that came into service shortly after the end of World War II and was literally being brought to Ukraine to carry out combat operations. It's like they're pulling out the museum pieces now. It's nutty. It's what it is. It's nutty. Over here in the U.S., however, there's something a little more, we'll just say, sobering going on. This is the Flags In tradition underway at Arlington National Cemetery. Members of Old Guard place American flags 1 boot length from the headstone's base. 260,000 flags are being placed before the cemetery opens. As a reminder, Memorial Day is Monday. Over in the Sumy region, now I want to play this one for you as well. Let me get this a little bit larger. If you pay attention, you can see these men have seen the drone. These are a Russian sabotage group trying to enter Sumy. And yet they found that they're under the monitoring of a drone. So they put up a white flag and surrender to the drone. And Ukrainian forces would take them prisoner. You can see, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got pictures of some of them here. You can see one of them, if you look very carefully, is being supported by his teammate. He's got an arm under him. He's limping. It's clear that these men saw a lot more action than they were expecting when they entered Ukraine, and they decided that it was much better for them to surrender than to try and stick it out. You can see some of the injuries they've taken here, but no signs that they have been mishandled, I should say, in their time in captivity. Then there's this one, and this is from Inform Napalm. They're a kind of an intelligence, one of the open source intelligence groups there. The Russian Federation began its offensive in the Kharkiv region earlier than planned due to the fact that the United States unblocked military aid. The original, from everything we've seen, the original intent was to actually go in and get enough of their soldiers and equipment together to go in and take Kharkiv itself, or at least surround it and put it under siege. Now, some of the soldiers were told they had 3 days to capture Volchansk, and they're bogged down there. It's clear that the original intention is to wait another month, maybe 2, really build up a force between right outside of Sumy and right outside of Kharkiv, and then flood into this zone and take at least Kharkiv, or at least surround the city. But then Speaker Mike Johnson suddenly grew a backbone. He found his spine. And they passed military aid. And a few moments later, the Senate passed that aid. And a few moments after that, the cargo planes started flying and the ships started flowing. And things started showing up at the front within a week. All of a sudden, Russia's looking at that and going, oh, man. Well, I got to act now or I don't act at all. So they decided to try and take it with whatever they could. And I think their hope was to just catch them by surprise and flood in. The problem is they didn't have the hardware to do a fast, like a motorized assault. So they had mostly men on foot. They don't have the hardware to pull off a real assault into this area that was going to penetrate very far into Ukraine and into Kharkiv. So this actually makes a lot of sense as to how this panned out. If the Russians thought it would be just another couple of months, they would have had time to kind of get their stuff together, get a few more resources there, get some vehicles pulled off the line. They'd already apparently pulled some of those units from Africa to come up and participate. Sometimes you need to think about your strategy and decide whether it's worth carrying out or not. And I don't think the Russians thought this through. Now, this is talking about from Tindar. The MIM-39 Block 1 version of ATACMS were introduced in 1991. It's basically technology from the 1980s and has been decommissioned by the U.S. military. The S-400 Triumph is Russia's most advanced air defense system. It has been introduced in 2007 and received constant upgrades and updates. Countries like Turkey or India, which purchased those systems, are certainly amazed when realizing what they acquired. The Ukrainian war absolutely backfired for the Russian military-industrial complex. Our 80s gear is blowing up Russia's finest, and not even breaking a sweat doing it. Ukraine's domestic steel producer, Metinvest, is adding combat-proven anti-drone protection they call Steelfront to T-72, T-64, and now Abrams tanks. That's right, Abrams tanks are now getting their own cope cages on top of everything else. So that's just kind of an interesting way war has been going here. Even the mighty Abrams is getting cope cages on top to prevent itself from being taken out by drones. Now let's go back about 10 years, and a member of the European Parliament was not working for Europe, but was instead working for Russia. This is part of Russia's spy operation. And this is another one of those things that people are like, oh, no, Russia wasn't doing any of that stuff. This is just all war now, because no, they had been effectively doing that. We saw last time there was a video of Russian tanks with Russian crews rolling into Luhansk at the start of 2014. That wasn't a popular uprising. That was Russia That was Russia coming in and inciting that rebellion, if you want to call it that. And then there's this MP, and I think I've got her name around here somewhere. In fact, MEP Tatiana Zdanoka. There we go. I got to practice some of these names in advance, I swear. She, when the whole Maidan revolution happened, she went to her Russian contact and said, I'm hearing from the Ukrainians. And even your guy, Yanukovych, he's going to sign the documents and join the EU in a couple of weeks. These whole thing, it's not going to peter out. It's going to get stronger. And that's when Russia decided they had to intervene immediately. Otherwise, even their guy, Yanukovych, would have been potentially signing EU paperwork. Russia's been at this war for a long time. Make no mistake, they've not stopped being at war with the West. And Ukraine was intended to be, well, to a certain extent, they were. They were kind of their vassal state. And yet, a popular uprising in Ukraine pulled it off. They stopped them from going back to Russia. Overthrew Yanukovych, who might have even signed that paperwork because of the uprisings that were happening. But they overthrew him and established a pro-Western country. Now Russians didn't like that. They're paying the price. And we'll end off with Dmitry at War Translated. This is a Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicle under fire, evacuating the crew of a previously destroyed Bradley infantry fighting vehicle in the Avdiivka direction. You can see it looks like they fired up some smoke. He's firing off some rounds as he's doing so. So they're getting the other crew off from their damaged and smoking tank, and they're going to bail out of there even as the ramp comes up. An orderly and effective operation to evacuate a crew from a damaged vehicle, and the Ukrainians make the most of those little M2 Bradleys. So quite the work there by the Ukrainian soldiers who managed to take something that could have gone a lot worse and turn it into something wonderful. And that's everything. In fact, they've got a longer version of this video. I'm going to just go ahead and post that into the comments here if somebody wants to watch that, because it is kind of fun to watch. But the meat is this video right here, where the Ukrainians managed to rescue their crew. Robbie says, that is wild. The driver has the rear door control. To drive and close it was awesome. These Ukrainians are doing everything with this equipment. They are doing the max. So, Robbie, you know better than anybody here how hard that would have been. And so obviously that is something significant there. So that's pretty much everything. No cat video today. I didn't have time before starting the stream today. But understand that I do appreciate every single one of you, and I'm glad that you have been part of our little community here talking about the Ukraine war. Before I sign off for today, I just want to say I actually ended up on a Discord channel talking about the Ukraine war, and there is somebody there who is hardcore anti helping Ukraine out here. And he basically challenged me to support my position. And every once in a while, you have to sit down and you have to ask yourself, do I really know what I'm talking about? Do I really have the power and the strength of conviction to hold under a withering attack? Verbal, not, typed, actually, not a physical one. But in the end, when I started seeing some of the commentary, I actually scrolled through this channel and looked at some of the previous commentary. This man had the run of this channel for months, strongly doing everything to prevent people from supporting the Ukraine war. And after the conversation, we started seeing some more comments, like positive remarks and questioning, well, I never thought of it that way. So sometimes you just got to put your neck out there and see what you can make out of it. And that's everything for today. Thank you again for joining me. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.